Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Celeste Mayfern-Swango, and I am the State Director with Environment Oregon and Environment Oregon Research and Policy Center. And I'm really excited about today's webinar, Electric Bicycles in Oregon, Everything You Need to Know About E-Bikes. This webinar is part of our Solutions to Climate Change webinar series. We've done webinars just like this one on rooftop solar, electric vehicles, and electrifying your home with induction stoves, heat pumps, and heat pump water heaters. And all of those webinars are posted on the Environment Oregon Facebook page for those of you who may be interested in checking those out. I'll also be sending a recording of this webinar to everybody who RSVP'd, and we'll also post it on the Environment Oregon Facebook page. So you can go back and reference some of the information that you hear today. So don't feel like you need to be taking copious notes. So I want to extend a really big thank you to our co-hosts for this webinar, Oregon E-Bikes and Osberg Foundation. So for today's webinar, we are going to hear from Karen Mason and Logan Tellis, transportation planners with the City of Eugene, who are going to walk us through the basics of e-bikes, components of an e-bike and types of e-bikes, and key considerations when you're shopping for one, and some rules of the road to keep in mind. And then we have Brendan Gallant from Oregon E-Bikes and Hood River on to talk about e-bike uses and trends. And then we have a couple of e-bike owners, Emily and Tegan, will be here to share their experience and answer questions. So at any time throughout the presentation, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll do our best to answer them. So I just want to start with some very quick context. So more and more people are purchasing e-bikes. Over 500,000 e-bikes were sold in the United States in 2021, and we're expected to have at least 13% higher sales by the end of 2022. And people across the country, including here in Oregon, are adopting e-bikes for a lot of different reasons. With an e-bike, you can commute, haul cargo, run errands, go for bike rides with your friends and family, get in shape, and more. And this is true for traditional bikes as well, but e-bikes typically allow people to go faster and farther than they can on a traditional bike, and they can make it easier for people with mobility challenges. Additionally, a lot of people are looking at the cost of gas and the impacts that gas-powered cars are having on air quality and climate change, and deciding that their commute, their personal errands, and more can be done by e-bike instead. Opting for e-bikes can save money and help you have a more active lifestyle, while also helping to reduce pollution at the same time. And e-bikes are also really fun to ride. So we wanted to host this webinar to give you all more information about e-bikes and how they can help fight climate change, save you money, and bring more joy to your commute. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Karen and Logan from the City of Eugene to walk us through some e-bike basics. Karen and Logan, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Celeste. Let me go ahead and get our presentation pulled up. There we go. Can folks see the slide deck that I'm sharing?
Looks great.
I'm seeing a head nod. Okay. So hi, everyone. I'm Logan Tellis. I'm a transportation planner with the City of Eugene. I'm joined today by my colleague, Karen Mason, who is also a transportation planner with the City of Eugene. And we're here to talk to you about e-bikes. We're going to cover a few things in our presentation today. We're going to cover some of the jargon and basics that you're going to encounter when you're shopping for an e-bike. We're going to go over some shopping considerations that might make a particular model or type of e-bike most appropriate for your lifestyle. And then we're going to cover some of the key rules of the road that you're going to need to know if you're owning and operating an e-bike. But let's start with the basics. So as Celeste referenced, I want to start by saying e-bike sales in the US are just booming. They've been extremely popular in Europe and in Asia for several years now. There are some estimates that there are going to be 17 million new e-bike sales per year in the EU by the year 2030. So they've been quite popular overseas, and we're seeing the US start to catch up with that. In 2019 to 2020 alone, some estimates project we saw a 145% increase in e-bike sales in the US. So the trend is really taken off. And I think that's a reflection of people recognizing that e-bikes are just such a versatile option. It doesn't matter if you're using your bike for commuting, if you're running errands like getting groceries or taking your kids to school, or whether you just want to go for a recreational bike ride. E-bikes can be a really fantastic solution for you. So why don't we go ahead and get into some of the jargon you're going to need to know. Let's start by talking about the three classes of e-bikes. As you're out shopping, you're going to encounter this terminology. Class 1 e-bikes are e-bikes that have pedal assist. They do not have a throttle, and they have a maximum motor output speed of 20 miles per hour. So once you hit 20, the motor is not going to help you go any faster above that. Class 2 e-bikes are e-bikes that do have a throttle, that have a maximum motor assistance speed of 20 miles per hour. And then class 3 e-bikes are pedal assist e-bikes that have a maximum motor output speed of 28 miles per hour. Now, I will say these are the three recognized classes of e-bikes, but there are certainly some things out on the market that don't meet any of these three criteria. So keep that in mind as well, that you might encounter some of that. Now, when you're looking at e-bikes, something to keep in mind is that there are two types of motors that you're going to be looking at. On the left there, you can see there are hub motors. They're centered on one of the wheels, typically the rear wheel, but you will occasionally find hub motors mounted onto the front wheel of a bike. And these can be a great, affordable option for some entry to mid-level e-bikes. The second type of motor that you can see over there on the right is called a mid-drive motor. It's centered more on the frame, the center of the frame of the bike. You can see it where the cranks and the pedals connect in there. And mid-drive motors, the really key advantage is you're going to get more torque out of them. Karen later in our presentation is going to cover some shopping considerations that might make that upgrade a good choice for you. Now, when we're talking about motors, you might be asking yourself, well, how do I activate the motor? There are two key types of motor activation. The first is pedal assistance. So you hop on your bike, start pedaling, and the motor will kick in. Depending on what kind of sensors you have on your bike might increase or decrease the amount of pedal assistance you're getting based on how fast you're pedaling and how hard you're pedaling. Additionally, your e-bike is going to have a screen mounted onto it, and it's generally going to be able to adjust up and down the level of motor assistance on your screen. So you can click a button to shift up to a higher assistance mode, or click a button to shift down to a lower assistance mode. Another way of activating the motor is a throttle. As we mentioned when we were talking about the classes of e-bikes, class 2 e-bikes have throttles. That throttle, it typically comes in the form either of a lever that you can hit with your thumb, or some of them have a handle that twists and you activate the throttle that way. Some folks find the twisting handle throttle a little difficult to handle. There are attachments that you can purchase that help a twisting handle throttle feel more like a thumb throttle. So that's something to keep in mind as you're shopping, what your level of comfort with that. Really, this comes down to a matter of preference, whether you go for something that just has pedal assistance or whether you want that throttle. The throttle, it's going to help you get up and go faster from a dead stop if that's something that's important to you. Also a throttle is something where, perhaps if you don't want to be pedaling the bike 100% of the time, the throttle can keep you going even without pedaling. Both of these are great options for cutting down on the effort of pedaling and saving your energy for biking further distances. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's talk about range and charging as well, because that's a really prominent thing that new e-bike owners want to hear about. You go online, you start shopping, you start looking at manufacturers, looking at different models, and you're going to be asking yourself, well, how do I know which bike is going to get me the distance I need to go? And a lot of manufacturers, you might see on their website, they're advertising specific like numeric ranges. You might go on a web page and see someone say, this e-bike can go 45 miles on a full charge. And something that I want to impart to you is that you should take those specific mileage estimates with a grain of salt. There are a lot of variables that can affect the amount of output, the amount of mileage you're going to get out of your battery. Things like the topography of the route that you're taking, the weight of the cargo that you're carrying on your bike, the weight of the rider themselves, temperature, air pressure in your tires. All of these are things that can increase or decrease the amount of range that you're going to get out of your battery. And when a manufacturer is stating an estimate like you're going to get 45 miles per hour out of a full battery, they're making certain assumptions about how ideal or not ideal the operating environment is going to be. I would say that a better way of comparing e-bikes in more of an apples to apples way, because different manufacturers might be making different assumptions about how ideal the operating conditions are going to be, is looking at the watt hours. When you're comparing the watt hours between different e-bikes, that's something that, like I said, it's a bit more apples to apples versus, one manufacturer making certain assumptions than another. Now you might be looking around and saying, well, the watt hours aren't advertised on the web page for the model I'm looking at. And this simple equation here at the bottom of your screen can help you calculate that. Some manufacturers will just list the volts and the amp hours. So if you just multiply the volts and the amp hours together, you can get the watt hours. And so this is something that's going to help you compare which e-bike manufacturers and models are going to get you more or less range. Another few key things to know about e-bikes and charging and range, in case you don't know, is that e-bikes have lithium-based batteries, and you can recharge your e-bike via standard electrical outlets in your house. Some people, they're thinking about purchasing an e-bike and they're worried that they might need a special charging station of some sort or a special type of electrical outlet, like someone might see for an electric car or something. And you don't need to worry about that. You can use standard electrical outlets to charge your bike. Almost universally, e-bikes are going to have detachable batteries from the bike. Most e-bikes you're going to see have a lock to the frame kind of system going. So you would plug in your key, twist the lock, and be able to detach the battery that way. Now, there are some models out there where you see the battery that is mounted via a bag rather than like locking to the frame. So instead of locking to the frame, you would have a bag and the battery goes in the bag and then you connect it into the e-bike. That's something to keep in mind if having that lock to battery is super important to you. Keep that in mind as you're shopping. My e-bike, I personally have an e-bike that doesn't lock to the frame, and I just take the battery with me when I go inside and just toss it in my bag, and it takes about 2 seconds to attach and detach from my bike. So that's something that didn't feel like a huge concern for me, but for some people it certainly could be. And now that we've covered some range and charging basics, Karen, why don't you pick up and talk about shopping considerations for folks?
Thanks, Logan. Happy to. So when you're shopping for an e-bike, Logan mentioned some of these before, but you're going to want to consider what are some of the things that are most important to you. You have questions to ask, such as, do you need to climb hills? Will you be using the bike to run errands? What is your home storage situation? How fast and how far do you want to travel? How much physical effort do you want to put in? And will you be using the bike on paved, dirt, or gravel roads? Your body is going to be a major factor in determining what type of e-bike is going to be best for you. Your height, weight, and physical abilities are all important to take into consideration. And to give you some examples of how these factors interplay with your shopping considerations, we're going to show you some different models and types of e-bikes and discuss the different things that go into them, why they may work best for you, and why perhaps not. So if you plan to ride mostly in town for commutes, then you're going to want to possibly consider a city or road bike. They tend to be more lightweight and have thinner tires. And as an e-bike, you might want to prioritize a smaller battery so that you keep the overall weight of the bike down. You might want something that is able to deliver that higher torque that Logan mentioned so that you can get from that dead stop up to a speed at a traffic light or when you're in mixed traffic. Hub motor might also be something to consider. They work well on flat ground, but if you live in areas with hills, then you might want to consider a mid-drive motor that works more in sync with your rear tires and can help you climb those hills more efficiently. If you're going to be using a bike to transport small children or pets or various types of goods, then a cargo bike might be the option that's best for you. With these types of bikes, you're going to want something that has more torque to help you manage that additional weight. But keep in mind that the more assistance you use, the faster your battery will deplete. So that could have an impact on your range. If you want a bike that's going to get you around town, but also handles itself on bike trails, then you might want a gravel or a hybrid bike. They have wider tires and that can provide better grip on unpaved surfaces, but they're not really suited for off-road trails. For those types of bikes, you're going to want a mountain bike or perhaps a fat tire bike. Those types of bikes, you're going to want to look for ones that have that higher torque to help you climb those hills and that have larger battery capacities for longer range. The trade-off there, though, is that the larger the battery capacity, the more weight there's going to be. So that may not matter too much while you're actually out and about on the bike, but it could be something to consider if you're going to be loading and unloading that bike from a rack on your car. If you're someone who's taller or has limited mobility, then you are going to want to consider a bike that has a step-through frame or perhaps a top bar that is angled lower instead of straight across. And just as with regular non-motorized bikes, there are multiple types of adaptive electric bikes for you to choose from to suit your best needs and abilities, such as e-trikes and recumbents. And if you have a smaller living space that perhaps a larger bike isn't the best option for you, then you might want to consider a folding e-bike or perhaps even some other electric micromobility options like e-scooters, one wheels, or electric skateboards. So another major consideration is going to be your budget. And e-bikes on the market, they can start as low as a few $100s, but the more expensive ones can easily get up to between $5,000 and $10,000. And there's a lot of reasons for that wide range in price, including the types of parts that are used on the bike, such as that hub or mid-drive motor, or the quality of those parts, where they're being made and manufactured and possibly imported from, and then also just simple market supply and demand. When you're thinking about that upfront cost, it's really important to remember that you get what you pay for, but also on this flip side, just because it's more expensive doesn't necessarily mean that it is better. So that's really important for you to talk to your local bike shop owners and get their input on it. They are going to be great resources for you to consult and tap into. You're also going to want to think about potential upgrades that you might want to make to your bike. If those are going to include components that are proprietary, such as meaning that they are exclusive to the company that manufactures the bike, or if they can be made more generically. And you're also going to want to consider your warranty. If you know your bike maintenance, that may not be super important to you, but if you're like me and the only thing I know how to do for my bike is inflate the tires and put the chain back on when it falls off, then that warranty when you need repairs and help is going to be super key. And your retailer, again, tapping into talking to your local bike shop owners, they're going to be really great resources, considering the service that you get. And when you shop local, they're going to be there to help you so that you don't need to take your bike long distances for those fixes. And circling on back to your budget, again, because those bikes can be really expensive, you might want to consider a conversion kit. They are generally on the less expensive end of the spectrum. And again, talk to your local bike shop owner. They're going to be really key in helping you identify if that's a good fit for your bike, or and installing them onto your bike if that is indeed a fit. So now we'll get a little bit into the rules of the road. So the Oregon Vehicle Code defines e-bikes as having no more than 3 wheels, fully operational pedals, a seat, a motor that has a maximum of 1,000 watts, and that motor is not capable of traveling more than 20 miles on level ground. So using that definition, we can say that an e-bike is not a motor-assisted scooter, it's not a moped, and it's not a motorcycle. So again, using that definition, we ask the question, do you think an e-bike is classified on the road as a bicycle or a vehicle? And as Logan is showing you, if you said bike, that is correct. The Oregon Vehicle Code defines an electric bike, as being a bicycle rather than a motor vehicle. But it also says that a bike is classified as a vehicle. So that's also technically a correct answer. It's a little iffy, but that promise you it all works out, because what you're going to want to do with that is basically more or less just treat your e-bike as a bike. So going into more of those legal basics, we can say that because an e-bike is classified as a bike, you only need to be a minimum age of 16 years old to ride it. A regular bicycle does not have that age distinction, but an e-bike does. A helmet is not required, but we do recommend it. And you do not need to have a license, registration, or insurance. For the speed limit, you're going to want to stay at a maximum of 20 miles per hour when solely using the motor. So with that, that means like if you don't have the motor on and you are riding downhill and gravity is kicking in, that is a-okay. You're probably going to be hitting higher than 20 miles per hour. I think I once clocked in at a maximum speed of 36 miles per hour going downhill on some mountainous roads. That is a-okay as long as it is not your motor that is causing you to reach that speed. And it does also limit what e-bikes are classified as to, sorry. And then next, it means that e-bikes can operate in the road using an entire lane as long as they are able to go at the normal speed of traffic, which e-bikes are able to do more easily than regular bikes might be. If you're going slower than the speed of traffic, then you need to stay as far to the right as is practicable. And you need to be using a bicycle lane or path when one is available to you, because here in Oregon, we do have a mandatory side path law. You cannot ride an e-bike on sidewalks. That is a no-no. So putting that out there. And with that, thank you so much. And if you have questions, Beyond this presentation, there is contact information for Logan and I right here. And thank you very much for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Logan and Karen. That was a really awesome presentation. We just have one question from the Q&A, if you wouldn't mind indulging us before we bring Brendan forward. Ruth is wondering if a bicycle helmet is considered adequate or if you should wear something more like a motorcycle helmet. Any thoughts on that?
I would personally say a bicycle helmet is adequate. You know, that being said, you know, it's good to do research. You know, there's some resources out there on crash safety ratings for different types of bike helmets. I personally like using something with rotational injury protection like MIPS. It's just something that gives me a little bit of extra comfort and confidence, knowing that if I am in a crash on an e-bike, it's probably going to be at a higher speed than I would be on at like an analog bike. So yeah, I would say bicycle helmet's probably sufficient. Do your research. I have seen some people use more like full face, like full head style helmets. I don't know if that's exactly the right way of putting it. So I mean, some people do make that choice, and if that's something that feels like it would help, you know, give you peace of mind and provide you with more comfort, then, you know, I would encourage you to research that and consider doing that.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Well, thank you both. And I will bring you back for the Q&A section at the end. But now I'm going to have Brendan join us. Brendan Gallant is the co-owner of Oregon e-bikes in Hood River. First, I just want to say thank you so much for being here, Brendan.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So my first question for you is just as a e-bike shop owner, what kind of trends are you seeing with the types of e-bikes that people have been looking for?
Yeah, good question. So I'd say predominantly when folks come in and they don't have like a bike in mind, they just want maybe something to get them back riding or get a little bit of help. That's what I call the middle part of the bell curve. Some of the features that were discussed, like a low entry frame, so there isn't a top tube or basically that bar up there preventing from stepping into the bike. A motor that's powerful enough to really help over some hills or distances or wind, which we have all of those here in Hood River and all over the Portland, Willamette Valley area. So those are kind of the majority brands like Gazelle or Cube out of Germany. Those are some really big ones. Scott's another one out of Switzerland, but primarily European based that use that mid-drive motor that was discussed as well.
And what are your kind of best sellers? What are people buying in Hood River and Oregon?
It's that style of bike for sure. Folks come in and again, they don't necessarily, there's a lot of options out there and they're trying to figure it out. We always start everything with test rides so folks can kind of not get too caught up in the weeds in terms of tech stuff, which we can certainly go into the weeds as need be. But most of the time, these products are really intuitive for folks and it's easier to use fewer words, grab a helmet, sign a waiver, get them out and riding, because the systems are really, really cool, especially the mid-drive units from Bosch specifically, bomb-proof, reliable. They're really easy, again, and intuitive for non-tech folks, which I love. It just gets people off the couch and on the road. Brand-wise, again, Gazelle's a really big one. It's those low-step style of frames, that genre, which a lot of brands have a competitive offering in. Outside of our shop as well. But yeah, those are definitely some of the most popular.
Awesome. And then I know there's a lot of folks who are looking for e-bikes for mountain biking and other recreation. Any tips for folks who want to go that route?
Yeah, just be aware of your local trail like ordinance or guidance. Here in Hood River, we're super lucky to have Post Canyon, which is e-bike allowed, but it's class 1 bikes only. Throttles are strictly not allowed and it is enforced. What those enforcements are, I don't think they're getting too aggressive, but point being, it's all about trail degradation. We want more people to use our trails, but respectfully. Respect also goes outside of the trails, but to other riders. So one thing we try to coach a lot of people on in the e-mountain bike side of things is you're going to be going fast, which is great. But when you're climbing up a hill and I'm on my regular bike, maybe because I just decided to ride that one day and you're on an e-bike, maybe give me a little space, or like, hey, can I pass you whenever you get a like that? Those just basic trail etiquette and, you know, just being good people, good ambassadors of a sport that we're super proud of. So those things are involved in the process. But yeah, that class one, and then really just like look at your areas and get that information. We do get a lot of folks looking at mountain bikes that might want to use them for hunting. A lot of hunting areas are on private property that people who have the property can decide who they like. They can decide. It's not like there isn't just some overarching thing. So that's probably the biggest deal, is just be aware of your local regulations. Again, in Hood River, we're super lucky to have a great trail system that is e-bike allowed and encouraged.
Awesome. And then I guess my last question before we bring forward Emily and Tegan is just what advice do you have, just general advice for people who are, deciding whether or not to get an e-bike?
Totally. And it's already kind of been hit on, but I'll reiterate some points. Intended use is the first question. So we always want to qualify what someone wants to do. It's not about like, oh man, I've had this bike on the floor, it needs to find a home. It's like, no, it needs to find the right home. So that's when somebody comes in, it's, well, okay, what's a little bit of your background? What are you looking to do? A lot of folks, it's like, I just want to ride my bike again, but it's just a little too far, or there's a hill. I mean, my commute to work is less than 2 miles with like 1,000 feet of climbing, because Hood River's on the side of a mountain, and then it's going to be going 30 miles an hour on the way home. I still race pretty regularly, so it's not for lack of fitness, but man, it's hard to motivate myself or be a sweaty mess if I need to go run to the grocery store. So those are things that deter me as a relatively active user. So that's why I'm on my e-bike every single day. But intended use is the first one, and then it's fit. So I think height and weight, rider weight were mentioned, finding the right fit to make sure someone's comfortable. E-bikes, traditionally, you're more upright, your back straight. A lot of folks like low back or shoulder and neck issues. We just want to be aware of those things, because you're not trying to find a bad fit. You want to find someone that's going to fit well in terms of use and their body, and then they're going to use it. That's the best part. So those would be my first tips and pointers. We tend to primarily align with mid-drive style systems. They're either going to be class 1 or 3. And from the service standpoint, after the sale, they're super reliable. Some of the brands you might hear are Bosch and Shimano. Those are industry leaders in terms of reliability, in terms of part support. So even if you came out to my shop and got a bike, but maybe you live, in whatever, Tiger, Beaverton, Portland Metro, chances are there's another Bosch dealer that might not sell the brand that you have, but they can still service you, which is super critical. Yeah, and then budget was mentioned too. That's also really important. And we treat budget with a lot of respect. Everyone wants to get on the stuff that we're passionate about. It might not be a new thing. There's nothing wrong with that. One of the trends that we're seeing lately is a lot of folks that were early adopters, say like 2017 and 18 or 19, they're ready to take that next step and like try something different. Or maybe they did get that bike that lets them do everything, but they go, man, I just am drawn to mountain biking. I want to get that specific bike. So we're seeing a lot of used bikes that have these super quality like Bosch systems at a fraction of the price of what a new one would be. So that's another thing to keep in mind, that we're starting to see a lot more pre-owned bikes that are still totally have a long lease on life left.
Awesome. That's really good to know. Well, I'm going to have Emily and Tegan join us, and Brendan, I'm going to keep you around since you are an e-bike owner yourself. So let me bring them forward. And special thanks to Tegan, who is joining us on his lunch break. So thank you so much for being here.
No worries.
My first question for you e-bike owners is, what made you decide to get an e-bike? What factored into your decision? And I'm going to have Emily have you go first.
Yeah, I very much enjoy riding my bike and found it really helpful to get some additional physical activity in during the day. But I also would really get discouraged at using my manual bike for that if the weather was ever bad or if the distance was ever more than a few miles, particularly if I was trying to get to work or the store. As you mentioned, Brendan, showing up really sweaty and out of breath isn't always the best look. And so those were my initial reasons to go for an e-bike, and really glad I did, because it actually helps. I can pretty much put as much or as little effort into getting the e-bike from point A to point B, so I can show up a little more presentable or less presentable, depending on how much exertion I want to put out there. So that was my initial thought, in addition to, of course, just trying to drive the vehicles a little bit less. But one of the unintended consequences that came out of that is probably my favorite part of the e-bike is it's really made me slow down and see my community and my neighborhood and my environment in a way I haven't before. Going a little bit slower on the exact same road I drive every day has been a whole new experience on the bike versus the vehicle. So
Awesome. Keegan?
Yeah, I think for me, like I come from, well, initially my interest in bikes kind of came from having kind of a political activism background and learning a lot more about like building walkable communities and just like how horrible so much of our land use in this country is. And so I kind of just became more and more fed up with cars in general and decided, you know what, like I've owned a car since I was 16 basically, but like it kind of sucks owning a car in a lot of ways. So I didn't sell the car right away, but I realized that for a lot of things that I use my car for, a cargo e-bike could do that just as well, if not better, or at least around the city. And so I got one, and then after a few months, I realized like, hey, I'm barely using my car at all. So I sold it, and now I'm all e-bike all the time now, and I love it, and I feel great both physically from having more physical activity riding the bike, and also from I feel like I just feel more aligned with my values, I guess, in a way. I really feel like every day that I like do my commute into work or whatever, like I don't know, I feel like I'm one less car on the road, which is one piece of this broader picture of kind of building a better community, I think.
Awesome. Congrats on being car free.
Thank you.
And then Brendan, which came first, the e-bike or owning an e-bike shop?
E-bike for sure. Been involved with bikes my whole life, probably not too dissimilar from everybody here, but like I said, especially in Hood River, it's a pretty intense environment, but everything's really close and it's incredibly hilly. It's very contentious to park in and drive for a lot of the time. And there's little bike infrastructure, and it's not meant to be critical per se. There's not a lot of room for it, but that's where like a class 3 e-bike has been super convenient. So the speed limit's 25 or 20 most places. Well, if I can maintain that or just close that delta, makes a huge difference in terms of me feeling safe as a rider. I'm not afraid to take a lane, but I'm going to lose the argument with that truck every time. So I want to be respectful of the fact that I'm the more mobile thing and need to keep that in mind. Also, I wanted to highlight in I think January 2020, it was like ORS 811.265, where cyclists can treat a 4-way stop or a flashing red light as a yield, as long as they're not putting themselves in danger or impeding traffic. So that's a really important thing that we're keeping in mind here, as we see a lot of kids in that high school age range where they're talking about getting their first car, where the parents are like, well, a couple $1,000, yeah, you could get that junker or something that I grew up with, that kind of stuff, or an e-bike that's way more mobile. But like we talked about the traffic laws, and then with that being able to treat stop signs like that, just having situational awareness of you might need to stop because if the vehicle's in there, like that's a bad day, or could be. But yeah, e-bikes, commuting or riding for recreation or mountain biking or any of that stuff. Yeah, just that's part of everyday life.
That's awesome. Emily, how do you use your e-bike? You mentioned going to work. Are you finding you're replacing more and more car trips with your e-bike, or how are you using it the most?
Yeah, so it started at work largely because I was really trying to get comfortable with traffic. That was really nerve-wracking for me initially. So it was the most familiar ride for me. So I just started with work. Then I did work in grocery store, and then I eventually expanded it to work, grocery store, and a lot of weekend recreation stuff. So we're about 10 miles outside of from North Tacoma, which is a lot of, I'm in Washington, which is a lot of where I go on the weekends. So kind of just really beginning to make that round trip practice after getting comfortable with some of the shorter distances. So now I use it, multiple times a week as a result of, those 3 things.
Awesome. And Tegan, it sounds like you've totally replaced your car, but anything notable about kind of how you use it that maybe surprised you or was different than you thought it would be?
Yeah, so I mean, the most common use is I just ride it about 4.5 miles to work and back every day. And then I did a bike tour with my girlfriend up to Astoria a couple months ago. We split into 2 days, and I was on my e-bike. She was just on a regular road bike, but because I have kind of a cargo bike, I carried like all of our stuff and all of our gear. So she was able to just fly along on her own bike. So that was really fun and and kind of eye-opening use of it, I think. I just every time I like have an excuse to haul something around town, I'm just like excited that like I can carry things on a bike. Like it just feels so fun to me. Like one of my favorite examples of that is I go every Sunday to a Super Smash Bros. Tournament. It's a video game if anybody doesn't know. And I bring a whole setup there, like my console, a computer monitor and everything there. Like the first time I realized like I could strap a computer monitor to the back of my bike, even like with like light rain going on, I'll just like cover it in like a tarp or something. Like that felt really cool to me to be able to do that without a car. So I'm just like, I'm constantly finding new things that I'm like stoked about being able to carry on it.
That's awesome. What about you, Brendan? It
Yeah,
sounds like you use them on the trails quite a bit, right?
Yeah, trails on the mountain biking thing, just to echo the utility, that's been like a big eye opener. Like I had commuted on regular bikes for a while, especially in like the Salem area where it's a bit flatter, but out here I ride a cargo e-bike as well, and I'm like I can bring everything I want, or I can go anywhere and do that. Like it's so cool. The other thing that I've found out is the bus network, especially along the gorge. Those racks in front are typically e-bike rated, or they're rated for that additional weight. And that's been another eye opener. Is there's a ton of ways, like you mentioned, the coast trip, to be able to get out there and like go on these huge road trips where you're utilizing these public transport features that might not be known about otherwise. That's been super cool. But yeah, but echoing all the same, like commuting and utilities been great. And then of course recreating from a mountain bike perspective. Again, our trail network is like 1.5 miles from my house, but it's all uphill and into headwind. So I use turbo.
If I could just add one little thing to what I said too,
Sure.
just about like using all those resources, like combining bike with bus has also been really eye-opening for me, like how much you can do with that. Like we rode to Astoria and then took a bus back on the way back, so we didn't have to do it both ways. And that was really cool, being able to have that whole ride, but like be able to still just relax on the way back and not have to do all that again just a few days later. So there's all sorts of options you can do to like get around with different public means, I think.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to bring Karen and Logan back because we're getting some technical questions. But why don't we start with a question from Dallas, and Brendan, maybe this is for you or our friends from Eugene. But what do you think of e-bike conversion kits for regular bikes? Are they worth it? What should I look for in a conversion kit? Any recommendations on brands? Thanks for the question, Dallas.
Good question for sure. I've done them myself. From a business standpoint, there's companies that focus on that, and that's awesome. As a do-it-yourselfer in some aspect, I totally get it. It's a pretty fun project. But for us, it's too much like a liability. So it's just not our focus from a business model standpoint. There's mid-drive and hub drive conversion kits out there. I've used them in the sense of getting adults with mobility problems on the 3-wheeled trikes with balance issues. That way it's just one less thing that they have to deal with to get people out riding. But that would be my first thought is if it's like coming from a tinker or hobbyist perspective, I totally get it. Most of the time, but the bikes aren't rated for the additional power. They don't have the adequate brakes, or they need extensive maintenance, at least for me from a shop perspective, to put my name on there. Again, do it yourself, or you can totally do it. It's just one more bike on the road, which I'm a big fan of, but there's some considerations to be aware of. Braking's the biggest thing. A lot of these conversion kits can go way too fast, like not in any of the classifications. I know because I built one and then I quickly took it apart because it was really dangerous. So yeah, just some things to be aware of. I think the advice previous of like checking with the shop, or I know Nomad Cycles in Portland does a lot of hub and conversion stuff. And he's been a big champion and a great resource I've leaned on as well when folks have those questions and I'm not able to get in as much depth or perform the services they're looking for.
Got it. Anything to add, Karen or Logan?
I'll add on, in our area at least, I know Eugene Electric Bicycles does quite a few conversion kits. It's the kind of thing where, you know, you're going to want to go in and show them your bike first and talk through whether a conversion kit is even going to work for your bike. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in conversion kits to do that. I will also say here in our area, the Eugene Water and Electric Board offers e-bike rebates. And that rebate is about to be extended to conversion kits as well. So that's something to keep in mind if you're in the Eugene area.
Great, thank you. All right, we have a question from Barbara for Tegan. How many times did you have to recharge your battery on your trip to Astoria?
I charged it once, but technically I probably could have made it the whole way. So we stayed at a campsite just past Vernonia, so about 50 miles into the ride. But what we did was we did the max to Hillsborough and then started the ride from there. So I charged at the campsite. I was trying to do a lot of the ride just pedaling myself without the assist also. So I was being like very conservative with how I used the motor. But I definitely could have used the motor a significant amount more, given that we had a spot to charge halfway through. So it had no problem. I would have had no problem just using it kind of as much as I wanted, as long as we had that stop halfway through.
Sounds like a really fun trip.
It was really nice.
We have a question from Oriana wondering just what's the general weight of the bikes? How do they differ from like a traditional bike?
They're generally going to be a lot heavier. You know, certain models and manufacturers kind of have more of a lightweight design to them. Like in the Eugene area, we have a local manufacturer called Bike Friday. They're generally pretty good about being lighter weight. As far as e-bikes go, some of the heavier ones, I don't know, maybe someone who is more on the sales side of things would have an input, but it's my perception that it's not uncommon to find e-bikes that are like 60 pounds, or maybe even a little more. Does that sound right to you, Brendan? Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Yeah, it certainly can be. There's no denying that lifting an analog or acoustic bike is less weight than what an e-bike is. Important noting where the weight is and what it feels like from a rider perspective. Also, there's a lot of ramps for, I know we're talking about bikes, but for vehicles where you don't have to lift it, you roll the bike onto a vehicle ramp. But yeah, 50 pounds is more than say 25, sure. But the weight's low and centralized. So riding it, the wheels are unweighted. So the physics is kind of the same in terms of like what it feels like. Typically the hub driven bikes are going to be on the heavier side. Bikes like Rad Power are going to be up into the 70s. Those bikes are built for a price point, whereas, yeah, for sure. And that's great, but it's just a different kind of conversation. I'd say on average, most of the bikes, like we talked about, the middle part of the bell curve are usually in like the 51 to 56 range, depending on their drivetrain options and battery size. Those are typically the most common things.
Great. All right, Alan is wondering, he's just asking up for a clarification, which class of bike allows you to pedal but use power assist when you want to use it?
So all of them allow you to pedal. The class 1 e-bikes, they're just the pedal assistance. So as you're pedaling, you have the option, if your motor is on, it will supplement your pedaling power with motor power. The class 2 e-bikes are the ones where you get into the throttle. And even when you're on a class 2 e-bike with a throttle, they almost always, I don't know of any that don't, they also typically have pedal assistance on them. So you could have your class 2 e-bike and use the pedal assistance and just have the throttle as like extra juice on top of your pedal assistance. Or if you don't want to pedal, you could use the throttle and not pedal.
Great. All right, we have a couple questions just about security. You know, obviously these bikes are a big investment. So some folks are wondering just what is out there in terms of locks, any advice for how to lock it up, make sure that it doesn't get stolen.
I sadly got my first e-bike stolen on my very first ride out. So as painful as it is to recall that, I can definitely speak to this question. Couple of mistakes I made on that one is I used a standard bike lock, and I thought I had everything figured out, but realized, because it was my first ride out, that I didn't fully turn the key to kind of lock down the bike. So even though I had the keys with me, by all intents and purposes, I left the bike running outside. So they were able to get through that. So that one's on me. Took about a year to pay it off, got brave enough to buy another one, and got all the bells and whistles this time. So I have a rad mission bike. And one of the things about that company is you can just kind of order. It's kind of like flying Spirit Airlines. It's like, I would like a seat. I would like a left armrest. You can kind of order any pieces that you want, nothing you don't want. So one of the things I made sure to get with it is they have a back wheel lock. And then they have kind of a specialized chain that they use, which is more hardcore than mine. And I always make sure to lock with the key before taking the keys with me. And that three kind of security system feels pretty good. If I'm someplace that I want to keep an extra eye on things, I'll also pop the battery out and take the battery in with me. So technically it locks when you leave it, but I just didn't want any additional temptation. So I'll just pop it out and stick it in a bag if I'm going to be in a place for a period of time.
Thanks,
I'll
Emily. Sorry
also
about your bike. Go ahead, Karen.
This isn't advice for locking, but I would like to also mention that there are ways that you can register and insure your bike. So there are sites like bikeindex.org or project529.com where you can go to register your bike just in case it is stolen. Then if it is recovered, it can be returned to you. And then with homeowner, renter, or car insurance, some of those can be applied towards your bike as well.
Yeah, and I'll also add on that an adaptive practice that some e-bike owners have started using is hiding like an Apple AirTag on your bike. In case it is stolen, it makes it a bit easier to track where it's gone. They have like little, you can buy them online, things that look like reflectors, and there's secretly an AirTag inside, or it looks like a water bottle like cage, but there's like secretly an AirTag mounting point like underneath it. Things that go under your seat. So that's something that can also give some people peace of mind.
Great. We have a question from Kathy. I think, Karen, this is probably for you. Does Oregon law permit riding of bikes on sidewalks, e-bikes or regular bikes?
I believe regular bikes, yes, but e-bikes is a hard no.
All right, well, I think we've gone through a lot of these questions. I just want to say final question for all of you, except for you, Brendan, because you already answered it. But any advice that you have for people who are looking to purchase an e-bike, or just general words of encouragement? Emily, why don't we start with you?
I was a hesitant adopter, as I mentioned before. I was really anxious about riding in traffic. It's always been kind of a high anxiety point for me, and I have been so grateful I've done it. I would say be patient with yourself. Start small, practice often, and just kind of keep adding a little extra distance on as you go, as you get comfortable. And it's pretty amazing how comfortable and well-versed you'll get over time. Invest in a good mirror. Like, once again, if they've got any, that's probably the number one thing I love on my bike the most is I got one of those really big side mirrors that makes those nerves feel much better. So, but definitely recommend it.
Awesome. Tegan?
I just recommend looking at all the trips that you do in your life and thinking like, oh, which of these could reasonably be done by a bike? Which of these don't require, lugging around like 2 tons of metal with you everywhere you go? And kind of thinking of just the ways that you could use it as a tool, and how that would change your life potentially, and how that would get you less dependent on a car, and all the ways that that saves you money and time and effort and stress. Yeah, maybe take the Bikey Town bikes out around if you're in Portland and see if you like those, and talk to people. I can leave my email address if anybody has more questions. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. I'm a total evangelist for e-bikes as a way to really solve a lot of problems, I think. So give it a shot.
Awesome. Karen?
I'm just going to continue to emphasize speaking to your local bike shop owners and employees, and relying on them for their great expertise in this field. They're going to be your biggest ally on this.
Yes, and next time you're in Hood River, go to Oregon e-bikes and hang out with Brendan. Logan?
Yeah, I'll just say e-bikes are awesome. They're so much fun to ride. You know, I'm not such like a seasoned cyclist. I had a standard bike before I got an e-bike, but now that I have my e-bike, I'm going more places. I'm going further. I originally, got it so I could bike my stepdaughter to school every day, and I wouldn't have been able to, just with my level of fitness, I would not have been able to do that without the e-assist. So, I would just encourage people to try it out, because I think it's a really, really great solution for a lot of folks.
Awesome. Brendan, any final words?
Mute. Okay. No, I think I'm stoked to hear people that are just as passionate as I am about something that I've decided to do for a living. So thank you so much for including me, and really appreciate and value everyone's input.
Awesome. Well, yeah, a really big thank you to all of you for joining today and imparting your wisdom and enthusiasm for e-bikes. And I hope this encourages many of you to go out there, test ride an e-bike, and like Tegan said, figure out ways in your life that you can be replacing car trips with e-bike trips or regular bike trips. So we're going to send out the recording of this out to everybody. So feel free to check that out, share it with people who you think might be interested. And thanks again, everybody, for joining. Have a good rest of your day. Take care.